Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil FAQ video. Today, I've got FAQ number 2 for 2026. This is part of our foundational series where we're answering frequently asked questions for newer growers and experienced growers who may not have thought about all these in detail. A lot of times in the garden, what you've been taught is how you keep doing it, and there may be a better way. There may be something that fits better for your lifestyle now, and so I'd like to talk about all the frequently asked questions that we get, starting with the fundamental basics. Of course, we will be doing FAQ videos for our YouTube videos, so be sure to subscribe, like, comment on here. If you've got a question, ask it, and we will answer yours. Let's get into FAQ number 2. I've only got a few questions here today, and the topic is on choosing containers, pots, and bed sizes. The reason why we're teaching this, you may have heard a little bit in FAQ number 1. The biggest mistake that growers make in living soil is they have this misconception that because you can grow a 1-pound plant out of a little cup in hydro with the perfect nutrient solution, albeit a little harder, but you can do it. They think, well, 5 gallons is bigger than I've ever used. That'll be the perfect living soil container size. It looks huge. And that is so small when it comes to living soil. And what I mean is, like, if you were to look at pictures from the books of the root system that grow underneath an outdoor cannabis plant or underneath a tree or a bush or a rose plant or whatever, you'll notice that most of the fertility is in that top layer, and the feeder roots expand far and wide. And then some of the roots tap down deep to get minerals and water. And then it takes an incredibly large amount of space to power what you see above. And so one of the principles of living organic soil is as above, so below. And that's an old Rosicrucian like saying, I believe, but it doesn't really matter. It still represents this inside versus the outside, and what you can't see, tip of the iceberg kind of thing. And so in living soil, the foundation, the way to choose container size, if there's no budget, no worry about carrying heavy things, you could just do whatever you wanted. The most amount of soil per your grow light, per your indoor area, or if it's in your backyard, per plant, so to speak, would be the best. It'd just be the best. But it's not always practical, and there's more than one best way to do something. And so most of us, if we're gonna talk about indoor, now outdoor, you want it to be accessible from both sides, like a 4x8 raised bed, right? You can go around both sides, you can weed, you can mulch it. So there's reasons why it's a certain shape. But you'll see, like, the big plant outdoor growers in California all use huge grow bags because they had a plant count. They're trying to get as much weight per plant count, when normally maybe smaller plants might be easier. So always look for your system, okay? But the fundamental purpose of the living soil is to mimic the underground root system to be as big, if not bigger, than what you're gonna grow above. And so if you're looking at, say, a 4x4 area as a standard size for a grow light, you could maybe call it 5x5, but 4x4 makes a lot of sense, and it's about how much soil would be under there. And some growers would say, well, I'll put 4 5-gallon pots. Those are huge pots. I could never go bigger. And I'm thinking, well, you have a 4x4. You could go wall-to-wall containers, and a 20-gallon pretty much does that. This huge container here, you can line 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in a 4x4, and it still has room. And so it's not, I don't know why people get caught up on this container size. It's like, it fits, who cares? It's under the light. But here's something that would work. Because it's self-limiting, you could use 5 gallons if you fill that whole tent wall to wall. Because then you'd probably have 25 gallons in there, 15 of them, and that would add up to over 100 gallons of soil. It's more about the soil as the horsepower. And the reason why is, a lot of times, if you only have 1 5-gallon in a tent, or 4, you're gonna grow big plants, and they're just gonna outpace that 5-gallon. And maybe you get it to perform, but it's gonna be harder to no-till and keep perfect cycle after cycle, because you kind of go on this roller coaster of burning the soil out, depleting it, then having to re-amend and wait time, where you can, like, plug and play when you have bigger beds and they just keep cruising. It's more of an even keel. So that's the behind the scenes on choosing a container size. Picture your canopy. Picture the size plant you're gonna grow. And know that you're probably gonna overshoot it a bit, because during stretch, they'll just get away from you. If you're newer, they'll be big. Especially in these systems. When you follow our method in learning, like, the good foundation for the environment and how to set it up right and the intensity of the light and how to water, if you happen to get good genetics and put those two together, like anything we do is going to make us look good, when really it's the foundational principles that are at play there. And it'll become important, because the worst thing that I can see happen is someone gets the environment dialed. They learn all the stuff. They get good at it. They put in their little 5-gallon pots. They get really good genetics. And it rages so hard, it outpaces the biology and those 5 gallons. And all of a sudden, they're wondering how they supplementally feed organics and brew compost teas and add Build-A-Veg and Build-A-Flower and Build-A-Bloom and getting the Organics Alive line and getting all the other products we carry. And they're like, man, this stuff's expensive. It can be so much easier. And so that's why this foundational thing is, what size pot should I start with? So here's the clear recommendation from me. What size pot? If you're brand new, try an earth box. You water down the tube. It waters sub-irrigation to your plant. It makes perfect watering, which means if you do the rest right, the environment, you get good soil, you get good genetics, you're gonna have a good run. You're going to have a good run, I promise. Then from there, minimum size I like to see 10 gallon, but I would prefer you to start in a 15-gallon pot with 1 plant, or go larger. You can do a 30 with 2 plants, a 30 with 1 plant. You can do whatever fits easily in your system. The caveat here, if you have an apartment, you're moving all the time, if you're not sure about the stableness of your life, maybe just throwing and going and getting a 4x4 bed and filling it full, it may not be the best decision. Even though I think it would work well, you may be cussing my name, thinking I have to scoop all this fucking soil out. It weighs 1,000 pounds. My landlords come in like, so every farm has its own operating principles, right? So you just got to be in tune with that, and then mirror that with what we've got going on with our container size recommendations. Okay, so next question, what size pot should I start with? Earth box or a 15-gallon? Now, before I get to the next question, I do want to talk about staging and sizes, okay? These are the 2 containers that I'm going to use the most. This one represents a solo beer cup, the red party cup that you can get at the grocery store. Go buy those, they work great. But once you've been done cutting the sides off with scissors and poking holes in them for a thousandth time, you'll just like to buy these that already have the holes in them, that are raised for drainage, that stack, that are like, I've used this 1,000 times. So pretty good investment in these little cups, okay? Every grower uses them. I don't know what it is. Like, it's like the perfect size for when you get a little seedling in here to transplant, do whatever you want with, and have a nice, healthy root system. The thing is that in living organic soil, if you wait and try and grow a big plant out of here, you're gonna get a little behind it. And the goal with living soil, don't get behind. Don't get to panic mode. The secret here is this is kind of like lagging. It's like the power comes from the whip, where that part that lags back is gonna smash and break the speed of sound, right? That's why it's so loud. Well, it lags in soil. We're gonna leverage that power to have a conscious, thought out system, but if you burn that out and all of a sudden you have like you're just like, how do I feed this? It overgrown. It's gonna be harder. That's a hydro paradigm. So this little container, when the plant is the size of the cup, I like to transplant before the roots get all root bound. If you know you can't, we've got tricks. We've got Build-A-Veg, Organics Alive, foliar sprays, many ways, along with learning, dimming the light a little bit, controlling the environment. That's one way to use smaller containers. The reason why most of us use these is not because we can't just start in something like this or right into the 20. In fact, many people plant directly into a 20-gallon. But let's say you've got regular seeds, you want to sex them first. And if you put a whole bunch in the 20-gallon, you might waste a couple expensive seeds, and then maybe a whole container had 2 males, and now you don't have a container in that grow. And while it was more natural, maybe it wasn't as efficient. So a lot of us will start a whole bunch of these in a dome, which means that we're not in there watering every day, which kills, it causes damping off. The dome keeps it moist, which means we don't have to do that, which is just planning ahead. So these work great. More of them in a small space. Perfect humidity, no damping off. Once they pop, now you can move it wherever you need, and you can just wait till it's about the right size. I don't like to transplant too early, okay? Then I go to the next size. Why do I choose a 1 gallon? It's probably not even 1 gallon, really. If you see in a milk jug, they're a lot bigger. All these pots are slightly different in shape and size, so don't trust these pot sizes. But universally, this shape is about a 1 gallon pot, they call it, a number 1. That's about perfect for me to get to the point where most plants will still be pretty damn healthy with just a top dressing at around week 5 or 6, after you slowly get them, a couple weeks in there and then transplant. they'll last long enough in here to show sex. Now, if you put it in a 2-gallon, it takes a little longer to sex because the roots don't hit the sides right away. And so it's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. And so that's a little bit about staging and why we do it. In the beginning, a lot of times people would do that in hydro is because they were just trying to develop these massive root systems because that's all that matters. Where in soil, you need all this soil, but it's not going to be wall-to-wall roots. The fresh moving new tip of the root that goes around the soil that's constantly being air pruned at the bottom as new roots come out, all of those are most efficient as it sloughs off and goes through the soil at picking up the nutrients. Almost like, think of like a snake at the tip, like eating as it goes through instead of like the tail of the snake. Now, on roots, there are micro hairs everywhere. It's not just the tip, but certain nutrients are best picked up when it has fresh soil to go through, and that's why the root systems need more space in living organic soil. That's also why we establish a very fertile mulch layer, because it tricks the plant into thinking it has all these resources. I might as well get really big. I've got everything that I need. Water's perfect. Nutrients there. I've got plenty of space. The bigger containers make a big difference. In fact, you can look at study after study that will say doubling container size alone will cause a 60% increase in yield. That's without, in my opinion, taking into consideration how much more even keel you can be on water and nutrients in a larger container size, and then keeping it no-till where you never throw it away, making this investment worthwhile. Why do bigger containers work better? It's an entire ecosystem. The above-below principle. There's only so much root space and so much biology that can interact. And so if you have a whole bunch of that, you can produce a big plant. And so if you flip to flower with a pretty small plant and there's still plenty of room for the roots to stretch, you'll see that. Because if you root bound a plant, flip to flower, it's not going to stretch very much. But when you take a plant that would stretch 2 to 3 times and it knows it has unlimited root space and fertility, it will go wild during the stretch, which means you can shorten your veg time, because you're planning on this huge spurt of growth based on the timing. That's based on container size and why containers work better. The other reason is bigger containers work better because we're not trying to have to dump it out and re-amend it. We want it to no-till, where we don't have to do any work. And so you want to be like double, triple the size you think, because then you're only using 20, 30% of the nutrients, planting right back into it and going. And then you're on this little bit of top dress before you flower, after you harvest, before you flower, after you harvest. Ooh, big plant, maybe twice, once during veg, once before flower. And then you're never, never throwing the whole kitchen sink at your soil and then needing a soil test because you overdid the sodium and jacked up the bicarbonates and chlorides. It's just so easy. That's where people make the stuff look easy, I think that's a huge, huge part of it. So I just wanted to teach you in the beginning. Now, if you're brand new and you're thinking, I don't have room for a big bed of soil, that's fine. Just know that you can make big mistakes in big soil. And so it's recommended to use an earth box to start. Once you see it, you can't forget how fast they grow. And then you'll know whether you're on or off when you're learning to water in a bigger container. 15 gallons is enough where when the plants are really growing, you're still watering every day, versus a 4x4 you can really overdo. So I recommend newer growers start in a 15, 20 gallon, maybe 30 gallon at most, then considering the beds, ideally starting in that earth box maybe before transitioning, and then either learning to hand water or going with like a blue mat, something where there's something controlling the watering is one of the biggest things because of biology and the soil and all that, okay? Fabric versus plastic versus beds versus air pots versus living soil pots, like what is all this? So I like these fabric pots, I use them a lot. There are many reasons at play here. If you're new to gardening, you might just think, wow, fabric's the best. Really what it is fabric does this, ships to your house. It used to be you had to go get a half whiskey barrel to get anything big, and they're like about $50 or $100. Or you'd see people using, like around here, they'd have cows and they'd have all the salt licks and feed in these big bright blue containers, plastic ones, and they'd go, once the feed's done, just put the tomato soil in there and grow the plants. And so it was more like what was available. And if you would go to buy 20 gallon hard plastic pots, 30 gallon, 15 gallon, they're large, they don't fit in a box very easily. You'd have to buy a bunch at once and it becomes expensive. And so this is a huge game changer. The fabric beds, you can kind of see some of these different shapes behind me. You'd have to go buy lumber, and a lot of people use like treated railroad lumber that's just totally toxic, or treated lumber from the hardware store, and it's coated in stuff that stop it from rotting, like heavy metals, arsenic. So in any case, building one can come with learning curves about materials, a lot of expense, transport, and heavy stuff where you could literally get a 4x8 bed like this, flop it open, get some PVC from the hardware store, and have a huge bed. And then this recycled material they use, like, it doesn't break down in the sun, it lasts a really long time. And the game changer was when they realized that living soil likes to be more moist for the biology, and that air pruning is important, but it can happen down here, and that this plastic would actually send the roots down and air prune down low instead of spiral, and the worms can work up here and it keeps the moisture in. So these living soil ones I just really like from Grassroots. The other thing about fabric pots is they don't have any holes in the bottom. So you're not gonna have like mice crawling in the little hole like outside on the patio. You're not gonna have fungus gnats getting in there and all this weird stuff and causing nooks and crannies of spilt soil and whatnot. It just contains everything so cleanly. And so that's a big advantage of these fabric pots. Now, when I first started, High Caliper designed a pot for the tree farms, and they'd just be in a bag and their tree would grow just like regular, and then you'd come with a tractor to dig it out and it'd be in the bag and you could sell the tree. And then that became Smart Pot, and they become used for gardening, and of course you could buy bigger ones and you could make compost in them and collect leaves in them, and they had all sorts of stuff. But growers started using them because the science was saying that, at least in hydroponics, if you could air prune the roots, you get more roots instead of the roots circling. And it became this big marketing thing. And so there's literally these pieces of plastic that have like holes in them, dimples, like nipples almost. And you would fold it together and make your air pot, they called it. And it was cylindrically tall. People still use them. In fact, when I see people and they're like, what's wrong with my plant? And I see an air pot, I'll immediately start talking to them about that. Because the air pot in hydro, it makes sense. You would get drybacks and you could feed all the time and it would air prune the roots. But in living soil, it just would never stay wet for the biology and nothing would work right. And it's taller instead of wider, and it was just bad for living soil. And then plastic pots, they're so expensive to get big ones, so that becomes kind of hard, but they work. I actually really do like 20-gallon, 15-gallon hard plastic pots. The caveat is they have the holes in the bottom. It is what it is. You learn to deal with it. Something about the living soil one with the plastic and the air there, I think, makes it slightly more forgiving on the overwatering. I do think they're better than just the traditional plastic pots. But then I don't use the Grassroots 1 gallons as often. I've just found that at my house, I end up with a pile of like really dirty fabric pots, and they're like, just storage wise, they're like in a tub, and I have to like wash them or figure out what to do with them. And it was just a step in process I didn't want. And so I just like being able to rinse these and stack them and reuse them infinitely, forever. So and then part of me likes the extra water holding capacity when they're in a small container, when I'm likely to accidentally underwater. So that's my reasoning behind the containers, some of the differences between them, fabric, plastic, all that, and maybe that helps you make some decisions. The other thing I've noticed, like the Earth Box, it's wider, although it's a strange shape. So some people might go to a 15-gallon because they like how it's round. You can get the Earth Box to work though, and part of its magic is that it's wider than it is tall. And I think plants like that for the feeder roots. And then because it's sub-irrigated, it doesn't have to wick the water all the way to the top, and it just stays perfectly moist in there while having air underneath and on top. So the container size, the type of container, it's something that, like, if you end up several rows deep just never questioning. I know a lot of guys that literally have orange Home Depot buckets with holes in them, and that's just how they've grown. And there is such a better way when you get these systems that work better, and I would encourage you to consider that. The last section of this foundational FAQ, how does container size affect mistakes? And so I mentioned it briefly throughout this, but to finalize this FAQ and really highlight the mistakes that can be made and how it affects it. People fear overwatering greatly, but that is very hard in a small pot. So that can help. But if you start in a big pot, overwatering is very easy. The other thing that you should remember is that when you have a small plant, overwatering is easy. When you have a big plant, overwatering is hard. And it goes both ways. In fact, in the last side-by-side, we had a difference in the yield because one of the sides was not irrigating properly. It had a leak that would shut off the blue mat, and I've since taught about that, but that meant it got less than half the water that the other one was getting. And correlatingly, it was not half the yield, but it was a lot less yield directly from the water. And here's the thing, you wouldn't know because both plants looked happy. And a plant not getting quite enough, it's not gonna be dying. It's just not gonna perform spectacularly well. And so the container size can affect that, meaning if you're in a 4x4 bed and you're just not watering enough, you're in there every day and you're watering like a gallon, the plants will actually be perky. They might drop some lower leaves, but they'll be perky up top and you'll be confused. You're like, why are they dropping leaves? Am I running out of nutrients? And you're like, well, it's kind of wet here on top where you've been watering. And then when you get a blue mat or when you get a real system and you start realizing, oh my God, those plants just went through 20 gallons in the last 3 days. You're just like, I get it. Like, I get it. And so that can affect your mistake when it's really big and you just think you're watering right and you're underwatering. That's why we came up with the 5 to 10% by volume rule for hand watering. That does help people conceptualize that when they're new. Other things is like, when you're in a small container and you grow a plant that's too big, it can really make living soil feel like it doesn't work because you're constantly fighting a nutrition thing because you have to feed it and it's just not how it's designed to be used. So container size absolutely affects results. And I think after watching this FAQ, you might better understand in your garden why you might start with like a cocoa coin, because the seeds are expensive and they're sterile, right? And then going to something small like this so that you can make sure that you have uniformity, not some runts that are taking up a 20 gallon. And then you can go from there and go, okay, they're all females, bam, right into my system, all uniform size, the best ones. Or you can say, nope, they still need to be sexed. One gal, bloop. And then you can accurately, healthily, not rage the lights, dim them. Follow the environmental protocol for seedlings. Let these ladies walk and show you their sex, and then we get them in the big containers. We get them ready for the race. Flip to flower, and you get this even liftoff, just blasts. And it blows my mind to this day how powerful and how fast these plants can be when given the proper stewardship, the proper environment. Really, that's why living soil is not a product, it's a system, and that's what we intend to teach you. Anybody can do this. If you've got questions about this stuff, we want to hear them. I want to answer them. If you got a buddy that's asking you a lot of questions you already know the answers to, send them to my videos. I'll help teach them. If you want to support it, check out our Patreon. Otherwise, subscribe to the channel, like this stuff, comment on it, ask your questions, and I'll do my best to get back to you. And that's it. Until next time, stay loyal to the soil, and I'll see you on the next Build a Soil video.